Now we're reading Iran is willing to attack on you. Can anyone explain to me why, if we have the most powerful military in the world, and Iran is saying we're willing to attack you on your soil, we're sitting here waiting for them to set off another 9/11 and we don't attack them? Can anyone explain to me how this nation has become such a nation of weaklings, that we sit here waiting to be slapped by Iran without doing anything preemptively? What kind of country have we become? Moving on to Iran, how dangerous is the situation, and what should the Obama administration be doing to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons?
Well, Michael, we've always known that there were two options with Iran: bomb Iran and stop their nuclear weapons program, but thereby igniting a regional war in the Middle East, or let Iran get the bomb. And a nuclear Iran will lead to a nuclear arms race throughout the region. Even the Saudis have said if Iran gets nuclear weapons, they will. Well, what does that mean? It means that the next war in the Middle East, and for thousands of years, there's always been another war in the Middle East, means the next war in the Middle East could well go nuclear. So we've been searching for a third option, an option C. And when I worked for Henry Kissinger in the Nixon and Ford administrations, he insisted that you never give the president two options. You always give him three options. You always want option C. So we've been searching for that option C. The Bush administration thought that a post-Saddam Iraq would be pro-American, it would be pro-Western, and it would be a counterbalance to the Iranians. And so that's why one of the reasons they went to war with Iraq. Well, that's not turned out to be the case. At best, Iraq will be fragile state, and at worst, it'll be one of Iran's puppets. So the Obama administration came in and they said, okay, we're going to find an option C, and we're going to have negotiations. That's been the problem. It's been diplomacy. So they tried to extend the hand of friendship. Well, every time that was rebuffed. So now we're trying, in the last month or two or three, we've been trying another option C, and that's to, in effect, put an oil embargo around Iran, take their oil off the market. That's the sanctions that the United States and the Brits and the Europeans have passed over Christmas vacation. And it's, in effect, a blockade of Iranian oil, but not using battleships. It's been using the banking system. Now, the question is, will the Obama administration enforce them and impose the sanctions that Congress has just really pushed onto the president's plate? And we're not sure. The president has indicated that he's not eager to enforce these sanctions. Why? Because he's worried that if Iranian oil goes off the world market, it will lead to higher oil prices. But I think that what's happened with this Canadian and American oil energy sources that we didn't have before but we now have, is that could compensate for Iranian oil. In addition, the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Emirates have said they'll pump more oil to compensate for any loss of Iranian oil. So I think for the first time, we have an option to strangle Iran economically, cutting off the flow of oil and thereby reducing their GNP by 80%. Now, a country that has no revenues coming in is a very unstable country. And ultimately, the Iranian people are going to overthrow that government if that government is what stands in the way of them and their subsidies and their economic well-being. To me, that's a far preferable option than starting a war with Iran or letting Iran get nuclear weapons.
Do you actually think we're going to end up going to war with Iran?
I think if we failed, would we go to war with Iran eventually? Well, nobody wants to go to war, and particularly the people who have seen war, the people who have seen and served this country so nobly in Afghanistan and Iraq. And if there's no other option pursued, then we are going to face the choice between a nuclear Middle East leaving the world in a far more dangerous position as even than in the Cold War, or we're faced with some kind of attack against Iran's nuclear sites. I don't think either of those are good options. That's why it's so important to really pursue, but again, to pursue ruthlessly and very aggressively a blockade of Iranian oil. The way Reagan brought down the Soviet Union was not by firing a shot. He brought it down by economic warfare. He realized that the Soviet Union was vulnerable to oil prices, that 60% of their GNP depended upon their ability to sell oil and natural gas. So what did Reagan do? He tightened the noose. He convinced the Saudi oil producers to drop the price of oil by pumping more oil. The price of oil went from $40 a barrel to $18 a barrel in a matter of months, and it broke the Soviet Union. They were bankrupt, and they knew they had to come to terms. Well, guess what? Iran has the same vulnerability. That's why using the economic weapon, I think, makes sense. But not if you're going to do it a little bit by drips and drabs. To use that economic weapon, it's got to be done ruthlessly, and it's got to be done rapidly, and it's got to be done without exception. And don't let up when the Iranians say they want to have negotiations, when the Iranians try to stall. Continue to press, because ultimately regime change, I think, is the only answer.
Do you think Israel will act before the United States, or neither of us will act?
Well, Israel has made it very clear that it's an existential threat to Israel if Iran gets nuclear weapons. And what that means is a nuclear Iran, the Israelis feel, means the end of Israel. So they're not going to tolerate that. And as the clock keeps ticking, the closer and closer Iran gets to being a nuclear weapons state, and us, the West, not being able to stop them, the more likely it is Israel's going to conclude it's got to have an attack. Now, what stands in the way of that? Well, the Israelis could conduct an attack against Iran's nuclear sites, but most analysts think that they couldn't finish the attack. And at best, it would set Iran's program back just a couple of years. That's why it's an option nobody wants to take. But, Secretary Panetta just Sunday night on 60 Minutes said that Iran was a year away from being a nuclear weapons power. And he said with regard to the United States, Iran is just 2 or 3 years away from having intercontinental ballistic missiles that could carry nuclear warheads and deliver them to the continental United States. So we've been talking about this for a long time, but now we're to the point where we have to make a decision. 2012 is the year of reckoning with Iran.